I don't do physical hands.
I know.
Try.
I didn't have sound. Thank you.
So you were a thumbs up. Okay, now we're on to the second letter. This is with regard to Washington County's participation in the Brownfields Coalition and supporting additional work to seek a EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant through our partner Metro. We've done this before to get EPA grant funded programs here in our region as well. So do any of you have any comments or are you thumbs up?
Thumbs up.
More money.
Pardon me?
More money. A lot more.
Yeah, well, we'll keep telling our congressional reps how important this EPA brownfield program is to our region. So onward, how we go. Then the other thing we need to do is come back to leadership communication, particularly with Ms. Angie. And I don't know if Mr. Anderson had the opportunity to finish all of his. So Ms. Angie, take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Just a couple brief updates. As a reminder, the election concludes tonight at 8 p.m. We've received 1,749 ballots out of 12,229 mailed out for this election. This amounts to a 14.3 turnout, and we expect the final turnout numbers to be around 20%.
But hang on a second. I'm a little confused because I tried to check out the voters pamphlets. And so this isn't a countywide election.
Correct.
This is the city of Sherwood, I can't even remember all the cities.
I can come back. There's about 5 or 6 different cities or special districts.
Okay.
So correct, there are no countywide.
That's what I wanted to
Countywide
bring to
measures.
life. Yep.
It is important still that we do, as Washington County does manage elections, just bring this to light from an elections integrity standpoint.
Yep.
And voters are encouraged to drop off their ballots at an official drop site by 8 p.m. or make sure they're posted with today's date through the U.S. Postal Service. Election results will be posted just after 8 p.m. this evening. Couple upcoming board meeting items I just want to highlight for your board. Next week at November 14th, I had to look at my calendar because I do think that the days in November are quickly evaporating away. I will be at AOC for the county administrators meeting starting on the 14th in the afternoon to Wednesday. So Aaron Calvert will be covering the majority of the meeting. So we are going to be reorganizing some items on that meeting. So your board will start out at 9 a.m. with BCC board agenda review. So if there's anything on the agenda that you would like to lift up, and then we will go to the Metro local share discussion. So we'll leave BCC communications and leadership for later in the day. Part of that is so that I can be in attendance for that item, and then I'll need to leave thereafter, and Aaron Calvert will be sitting in my place. Also, I want to lift up for awareness, I mentioned this at your roundtable, staff are working on the Public Safety and Justice version 2 paper. Thank you for your time, commissioners, and your one-on-ones with staff. We are also working on a communications plan. So you will see on your calendars, we're working with your staff assistants on several calendar holds. Those are only calendar holds until we have a conversation with your board on preferred communications, kind of rollout in conversations with our community. As we are targeting January for these dates, we need to focus on getting these dates on your calendar right now. So please don't be alarmed yet. More information will be coming on the 28th, and we'll be looking forward to your board input at that point in time. And then it concludes my update.
If I might, you're mentioning the Public Safety and Justice Communications Plan reminded me that at the Acre meeting last night, when we went over the strategic plan update, it highlighted the rollout of the different pieces that we're constructing for the strategic plan update. and having a journey utilizing both Acre as well as sharing with the CCI CPOs. So I'll be talking with Bruce Bartlett, the chair of the CCI, for an opportunity to explain to them this rollout or the formation, this build up really, until we get to the point of having a final draft available for all those two particular committees as well as the community at large to review the plan for public comment. So we'll make sure to get that updated schedule to all of you. So and then also back to Commissioner Fai's trip to the White House, what to represent the Washington County's contributions. It would be great if you send the talking points to the full board. But also this trip opportunity is one of those extraordinary opportunities that a representative of the county commission gets to represent us in business trips to the administration and to hear back. So I appreciate her notes and report out this morning. But it highlights how, particularly in our constrained budget environment, how we need to lean into making sure through our budget that a commissioner in that circumstance with board support can make the trip. So we talked at the roundtable last week about creating a process around commissioner travel and training. But related to this, I would appreciate having the board support to work with Ms. Angie, because one of the things on covering Commissioner Fai's travel to DC last week in representing us, because, for example, Ms. Angie can't make the decision herself to use dollars that I may not utilize or choose to not tap into to ensure that we have board participation. So I would like to, I'm asking for your thumbs up for me to work with Ms. Angie to both draft a program policy for us to consider regarding commissioner travel and training, but more specifically to allow me to engage with Ms. Angie to see how we can ensure that we can cover and reimburse Commissioner Fai for those travel expenses. Two different things.
Thumbs up for me for both.
Okay.
I think we're going to cover that through campaign fund. You're not going to now. That's not what we're suggesting now.
So while she could, I'm proposing that as it was a business trip, it wasn't clear last week what solutions might be in place. And that's why I'm asking for your support for me to explore with Ms. Angie how we might reimburse her.
Anybody but Nafisa. No, I'm teasing. Of course, I think that makes sense.
Commissioner Treese? Okie dokie. Great. Thank you. So stay tuned on that. Sorry, I had to digress on that. Go ahead.
Speaking of schedule, I will be here next week for the full board meeting, but I will not be here for November 28th or December 5th, out of town. And Courtney will be sitting in my stead in the board meeting. Two other quick things I want to share with you that happened in the last week. One is we got, as was described in the hot sheet, we got a ruling from Judge McShane on the issue of, the public defender crisis and people that are accused of crimes having access to a criminal defendant or, public defender. And the judge broadened the scope to apply statewide instead of just to our county. The state DOJ is obviously involved with that now and has filed a motion to stay until that can be addressed further, obviously, because now it's a statewide interest. And the other significant change is reduced the amount of time somebody can stay in custody without a public defender to 7 days instead of 10, which was the previous number. So still remains to be seen. We know that the state is appealing that decision as well. I think we've discussed it a number of times. There's nothing Washington County can do to control it. We just operate a jail. And so the issues are primarily, at least from the sheriff's perspective, are just operational in nature. So that's the update there. There's more to come on that, but
Brett,
that's
I had one question.
status. Yeah.
Let's say somebody committed a very heinous crime. They murdered somebody, but they can't get a public defender. We wouldn't release somebody like that without representation in 7 days. I mean, that would be silly.
We
have
would.
no
We
choice.
don't have a choice. So it's really incumbent upon the court system to get that person a public defender. We don't have control over that. I know this is one of those.
The dilemma.
Yeah, I understand for a
Potential
lot of
outcomes.
times. For some, I thought, boy,
So our presiding judge has been working with DA Barton and Sheriff Garrett, along with staff broadly in the different departments, to try and find public defenders as quickly as possible. It's not all all the tricks they've been pulling, all the levers they've been pulling isn't sustainable. And now this additional reduction of time is really a tremendous hardship. And I really feel for all members of our wider public safety and justice team that are trying to obey the law and the judge's determination. The state, by virtue of this latest ruling and the communication that you and your team have shared with us, I think we have to use our voice and put pressure on our Attorney General, every state legislator, and Governor Kotek, because public safety is at risk. I mean, maybe this means that we need to write a letter to all of those parties. And yes, I know that the state is appealing this, but during the course of that appeal, we still have to follow Judge McShane's decision, right?
Right.
So I would really ask that, Ms. Angie, that we get support from you, Brad's office, government relations, our staff assistants, to put together a communication on this. I don't like to use an analogy that is a negative one, but it's too scary to contemplate what could happen. And I appreciate that the state legislature has provided additional funding, but it's not enough fast enough to make up for the past time of underinvesting. It was interesting just last night. I was hearing the rebroadcast of Think Out Loud that talked about the underinvestment of education statewide over decades. Well, that same statement can be used for public safety and justice, right? All aspects, court, community corrections, juvenile justice, you name it. as well as Health and Human Services, Public Health, right? I mean, we are not doing ourselves any favors with regard to underfunding the principles of our democracy and the republic that is the the United States of America. So, yeah, big time help needed.
Indeed.
So thank you in advance for not only the members of your team, Mr. Anderson, but also all of our court release officers, our jail staff, our county council, the district attorney's office, and our presiding judge for continuing to navigate this very difficult situation.
Indeed. One other quick issue, a little brighter. We got a positive resolution to the significant natural resources DLCD, the enforcement order, if you recall that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we got a result back, which was what we had been asking for, which is
I jumped to the wrong conclusion.
Yes. We still have to do the work.
you still have to do the work in the urban area. It's just the rural area. You remember that?
Yeah.
That was Aaron Doyle and her team getting the bill passed that really focused on where that should have been addressed.
Yeah.
So
Great.
so we got some good resolution there.
Good. Thank you very much. In addition, you all may recall, I mentioned, I think it was at our roundtable, how I had a meeting with Metro President Peterson and Metro Councilor Christine Lewis, the Metro Council rep to all things SHS. And they were seeking my opinion with regard, as they did with the other two county chairs, with regard to their already having had discussions with members of the Metro Portland Chamber of Commerce and the Welcome Home Coalition to put together a referral of SHS amendments to the SHS measure. In that, in the notes from that meeting that you've seen via Ms. Kyle, I asked Mr. Anderson to work with his county counterparts to give us an opinion about does the SHS measure in his and their opinions allow for affordable housing construction. And so I just received that information. So that's in your inbox. Also in your inbox, the city of North Plains chose to send to the board a letter by sending it to Ms. Angie, copying a few of us. So I just shared it out to all of you. The main text of the letter is 5 pages. I've not read it yet. I just got it to you right away, but it's an entire 37-page document. So I don't know the entirety of it, but I did make sure that Mr. Anderson has that as well, going back to our conversation earlier this morning. So whew, just a lot of unexpected thing as part of communication today. So, all righty. Well, here we are at 20 minutes past the hour, and I think we are now ready to get on with our afternoon work session topics. So we have quite a team, a panel. So we can move a third chair and a third microphone over to talk about or hear a presentation on planning efforts and authority to address future local and national public health emergencies.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Greg Sunshine here, and his name fits him very well. He is a very pleasant person to be around. Greg comes to us from the CDC, and he's an expert at, not only is he an attorney, but he's an expert in legal preparedness and a whole host of other items that he can talk to you about. But we've been trying to get Greg here for a while, and tried to line it up with Raja being here as well. And all things worked out. That's not to say it wasn't bumpy trying to get authorization because it's federal funds that bring Greg to us. And as you know, that's a challenge right now. So anyway, we got,
Thank you for navigating those waters.
Yeah,
Yes.
I really appreciated your staff being willing to ride it by the seat of their pants because we didn't really know exactly if or when approval would come for me to fly out here.
Yeah.
But it came in time.
yeah, so Greg's going to come here and give us a presentation on the preparedness, the legal aspects of it, and just give you an opportunity to ask questions of him as well. So thank you, Greg.
Thank you so much, Brad. It's my absolute pleasure to be here with you all. I'm Greg Sunshine. I lead the League of Preparedness and Response work for CDC's Office of Public Health Law Services. I've absolutely got enamored with emergency response work even before going to law school, and then was thrilled that I had the opportunity to focus on emergency response law while doing my legal studies, and came to CDC actually by way of the Baltimore City Health Department doing response work there from the programmatic perspective. And so I've actually sat in the role of some of the staff here at the health department even before I came to CDC. In the 10 years that I've been at CDC since leaving Baltimore, I really try to bring those lessons that I learned of local government in my day-to-day work and the lessons that I learned being a newly minted attorney working in local public health, recognizing that everything that folks in public health do every day are enabled by, affected by the legal authorities. They have to understand the law and know how the law affects their jobs in order to respond effectively. But I, had the benefit of being an attorney in that role. And so my kind of whole personal mission and the overall mission of our office is to help, attorneys who represent health departments work across the country with each other, and also to help non-attorneys in health departments understand how the law can be a beneficial tool for them and something that they really need to be aware of. So just a very brief, actually, even before I get to disclaimer, the background that Brad gave, what led to this trip, I think really just touches on how valuable of a partner Brad has been and the expertise that he's generously offered to other state and local attorneys. And a lot of the times that I am talking to leadership at CDC about challenges that people in the field are having implementing some recommendations or aspects of funding or programs or strategies for response to an emergency. Oftentimes, I am become aware of those issues because of Brad's input and making sure that the voice of Washington County is heard on the calls that we have with attorneys around the country. And we were thrilled when we saw Washington County received recognition, a NACHO award for innovation for some of the effective uses of public health tools that you all have had approved here in Washington County. So
When did that happen?
Last year.
yeah, last year, 2022.
Yeah. I think we shared that information with you.
Yes.
Yeah. Washington County received an award. Yes.
Innovative Public Health Practice Award.
Yes.
Staff can pull it from the archive and we'll resend that to your board.
It's a large trophy out in the hall.
I think it,
That was so last year.
Yeah.
I think it sits with public health.
Saving me from myself.
So we really wanted to continue to engage with Washington County and provide our expertise as folks in Washington County have always been so generous in giving their expertise to us, the federal level. In terms of expertise, I am not a scientist, so I definitely can't speak.
Welcome to the club.
Yes, I can't speak to CDC, scientific aspects or agency policies or guidance. And I am an attorney at CDC, but I'm not an attorney for CDC, so I don't represent the agency. We provide subject matter expertise to the Brads of the world and the Maries of the world and the Tanyas of the world by helping fill in some of the specific gaps in knowledge about particular uses of public health law as a tool to protect their communities through subject matter expertise, but not actual legal advice. So I don't represent the agency. I actually don't represent anyone for that matter, but I am an attorney. And it speaks to our office's mission, which is to advance the understanding and use of law as a tool to improve public health outcomes for all people. And we do this by help building scientific evidence base for certain laws and policies, engaging in a lot of partnership and outreach work, which is what I was referring to with regard to Brad's work on different committees and work groups to help provide information on pressing public health issues, and trying to bring up, the next generation of public health attorneys through the fellowship that we created. Where we have the pleasure of having Raja as one of our fellows this year. I do a lot of training and workforce development, and kind of all of the different aspects of our work coming to bear with my job, which is legal preparedness and response, and that's something that I'll talk about today. But to start, what is public health law? It recognizes, it's the acknowledgement of this very multifaceted governmental system we have in our country, which makes up our public health system. I really like this graphic because it does demonstrate, aspects of federalism, different in the authorities of different levels of government, as well as, how multifaceted public health work is. It is interjurisdictional. It is interagency within jurisdictions. It's within government and outside of government. I like to say that each line, each intersection point of these triangles, each piece of punctuation, a parentheses, a comma, is a legal issue. It's a potential legal issue. And they really can impact the work that you do in addressing emergencies if you don't take the time, go through the intentional effort of exploring the legal challenges at each one of those intersection points, as well as then operationalizing the answers to those questions that you have, so that those lessons aren't forgotten, and that you memorialize and institutionalize the good practices that you've developed. So what makes the timing of this trip so perfect is your staff here are working diligently, looking at the processes that have been utilized in the past few years in response to many different emergencies, and to better understand, effective use of governmental public health response actions, and to really find those best practices so that we can continue to use them going forward. That's interagency. It is an effort that requires a lot of intentional devotion of energy and resources to do so. And I think it speaks to the role of different aspects of government, and particularly those overseeing governmental operations, that your recognition of its value, supportive staff looking at these systems and processes, these laws and policies that allow the implementation of an effective response, that you see the value in that, and that also the value of that we have. So public health law is recognizing the responsibility and the authorities of government to protect public health and safety, while also recognizing that in our system of governance, we have to have checks and balances that make sure governmental actions are accountable, and respective of that we're good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, and respect individuals' rights and liberties and autonomies. And it's always a balance between those two, protecting public health and safety, and ensuring that we're using governmental response authorities responsibly. And so public health law is really, both of those aspects are key to the effective use of public health law in emergencies, which leads to what legal preparedness is. And it is, a recognition that, the laws can change in an emergency in certain ways, that, through smart recognition of some of the challenges in past responses, through the kinds of after action reviews that your staff is doing now, they recognize barriers and efficiencies, things that worked well, but as well as things that were challenging in response, and building administrative and legal systems to better address them in future emergencies. And so as just a little visual demonstration of how complex this can be, the second chunk of text was very intentional. The reason it looks as complicated as it is because using these response systems, these response legal systems is complicated, often, but not always. Powers to more effectively respond to an emergency are triggered by either or a combination of federal, state, tribal, local, and territorial declarations or proclamations. They are different in some jurisdictions or the same in some jurisdictions of a disaster or an emergency or a public health emergency or a catastrophic health emergency. When you have roles and responsibilities of agencies and tools to enable response siloed within certain kinds of emergency declarations and certain kinds of response actions in certain contexts, you can see how kind of complicated it can be. And a lot of times we aren't able to identify what those barriers to an effective response were when those barriers were legal or administrative without really intentionally devoting the attention and resources of staff to examine them and look for solutions going forward. And so law, establishes the authorities and policies and governs how response authorities are used. It enables attorneys to, maximize the effectiveness of a response while minimizing legal exposure, but not eliminating legal exposure. You have to do that cost benefit analysis of, benefits to the community and the legal defensibility of a response action. And having, good attorneys like Brad are absolutely vital. The key, though, is when you are lucky enough to have the legal support and the staff that you have here to identify these issues and find solutions, how do we make sure they're sustainable, that they continue going forward? They're not forgotten when staff changes. They know to reach up and grab a binder off a shelf and look at these policies going forward. And that really involves the buy-in from everyone within the governmental system from top to bottom.
Can I
Yes,
pause
absolutely.
here and ask a question?
Yeah.
Because it's really, my question is getting in the way of my valuing what it is you're trying to cover here.
Mhm.
As far as I know, the only public health emergency we've had in my 5 years of being on the board is the global pandemic. Has there been another one? And particularly it goes to the question of differentiating between an emergency and a crisis, right? Because a lot has been said first about the opioid crisis, now the fentanyl crisis, but apparently a crisis isn't an emergency. So, Mr. Anderson, what kind of topics have you been engaged in advising on? Because as far as I know, we've only had that one emergency.
So areas where we didn't declare an emergency in the past but came up: SARS, MERS, Ebola. Those have been, we did a lot of talking and planning, but we never declared an emergency in those particular situations.
And the field of the understanding of legal preparedness and the tools of legal preparedness are not limited to public health threats, as in disease outbreaks or issues of substance use disorder. They're principles that were originally developed, as with our incident command system, through emergency management. So wildfire response, earthquake response, tsunami response, those principles that were developed actually originally to respond to house fires, having command and control structures. Legal preparedness recognizes the value of all of our emergency response structures and the how we can enjoy the benefits of identifying the effective use of response tools or alternative policies that we can activate, we can turn on when a situation calls for it, for everything from an active shooter event to an earthquake to a pandemic. There are principles that are kind of broadly applicable. That's one of the things I really enjoy about my job, is because it really is, it's context agnostic. It's not specific to one kind of threat. And when we can say there was value in looking at the processes we use to spin up a response, to take certain actions to get additional staff or get additional resources in response to a pandemic, that informs how we respond to the next wildfire. Because the principles of good governance to effectively, protect your communities and work across all agencies as, like a one government approach applies to many, many different contexts. And so the role that I think is unique to Board of County Commissioners is you can recognize the value of agencies working with each other to identify those efficiencies, to identify potentially overlapping roles that can be complementary, or if there's challenges in coordination and there has to be a focus on certain roles within certain agencies, that's, the position that governing bodies of agencies you can issue those kinds of mandates. So that continuity across government, and then the continuity of information across time is established when, in recognition of the value in finding these efficiencies, understanding that the next step is to normalize them, institutionalize them. Are there aspects of position descriptions, of continuity of government plans, of resource acquisition and allocation that we can develop, that we can put into onboarding and training and make part of someone's expected roles and responsibilities on a regular day-to-day basis, so that they understand how they're going to respond in the event of any kind of emergency.
Okay. That last part really helped rescue me in this topic, because I find I don't tend to be a cynical or a skeptic. But when it comes to this whole domain of preparedness, including public health, we've been relegated to a very small, tiny box. And God forbid we get out of that little, small, tiny box. That includes, we were all asked to be interviewed in an after-action report on COVID. I've not seen a single report about that. I sure didn't appreciate going through the trauma all over again. So, but apparently I had a role in that little box.
Yeah, I think.
So if I can respond, Chair, you're absolutely correct. The board did have a role in that box. And thank you for the time that you provided within those after action interviews, excuse me. The words finally came out. Maybe I need caffeine. And staff are working with the consultant to finalize that report, and then that will be delivered to you. We're expecting Q1 of 2024.
Okay.
And I do want, Mr. Sunshine had alluded to also COOP planning. We are working through a very intentional effort throughout Washington County of updating our COOPs with
What's a COOP?
our continuity of operations plans. So staff are actually actively working on that. Having a public health emergency, the global pandemic, has allowed staff to really look at even our COOPs very differently than we probably looked at the COOPs prior to the global pandemic. So Mr. Sunshine's kind of lifting up what's the legal component of this, because you've heard from Mr. Wheeler on what's the emergency management. They go hand in hand as we develop and look at our policies, practices, and procedures.
And it really is, it's two steps. It's that legal preparedness. What are the authorities, policies that we have available to us? How can we use them effectively? Do they potentially create some barriers to effective, efficient response? And then on the administrative side of things, the second step is then operationalizing them through what's known as administrative preparedness. And it's really how you operationalize legal tools, programmatic capabilities, allow you to reduce the burden on county resources by pre-identifying effective, efficient systems, principles of good governance that you can use to then effectively respond to the next emergency without having to reinvent the wheel every single time. So NACHO, the National Association of County and City Health Officials, surveys jurisdictions on various aspects of preparedness. And this graph that you see here are the reported barriers to that administrative process that identification of effective policies, or identification and then resolution of barriers that prohibit government from responding effectively to an emergency, and then putting them into practice through things as bureaucratic as emergency purchasing agreements, or contingencies for having staff from other agencies reassigned for response. Let's say you need staff to help manage traffic because they're evacuating as a result of a wildfire. Well, who needs to approve that reassignment, and how does a person from one agency now report to an individual at another agency, and how is their work going to be directed? And so staff at local health departments identified some of the barriers to this process, this administrative preparedness process. And major barriers that you can see here include leadership buy-in. This was present at all levels of government. It was actually particularly common among some smaller local health departments. Availability of tools, training and education on how you implement administrative preparedness best practices, and among larger jurisdictions, the lack of authorities and policies. But this was also ever present across small, medium, and large size local health departments. Recognizing that the places where the law, is more of a hindrance for efficient use of government resources to respond to an emergency. So I think all of these, these areas that I just kind of specifically highlighted are roles that people in governmental leadership really have a say in how authorities are examined for places they can work more efficiently, and then how we implement those efficiencies going forward so they're not forgotten before the next emergency happens, whatever that emergency is. So just to kind of wrap things up, the strategies to address these challenges when it comes to legal administrative preparedness is, it comes down to prioritization, coordination, and continuity. Prioritization of the specific examination of these processes through after action reviews, which your county staff are currently engaged in. Coordination across different governmental entities. What are the roles of different agencies in response to different kinds of emergencies? And what are the efficiencies? One agency might have a fantastic emergency contracting procedure that they've developed that other agencies would really benefit from during an emergency. And it's the continuity comes in recognizing that we can only benefit from the tools that the law gives us and the efficiencies that we have identified and developed in response to past emergencies and lessons learned from exercises, even if leadership can build them into the day-to-day work, and it just becomes a normal part of doing things. If someone is reaching for a form to approve a purchase, next to that form that they grabbed is the emergency purchasing form that you use in a break glass in case of emergency situation. And it is not a surprise to anyone in the system that we have identified an alternative mechanism that we can use when the situation calls for increased governmental efficiency. So that is it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions and hear your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Well, let me start with Commissioner Treese. She is our representative to the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization, to see if she has any comments or questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair. And one of my questions, I don't know if John Wheeler is in the room or
Yes, he is.
Oh, good. Okay. That makes me feel more comfortable. And I'm trying to figure out how this information fits in with the regional approach to disaster preparedness. So I'm not sure that I have a direct question other than to work with John and say, how can this apply to the RDPO?
And while he's walking up, I can just say that, these administrative processes, a lot of the examples I gave related to how one agency operates in response to an emergency, but I didn't acknowledge that, processes and efficiencies of those processes have a major role to play when individuals are being evacuated from this county to another county, or services are going to be provided across county lines in a regional system. That any instance where you have that interjurisdictional coordination, the kind of the intentional exploration of the legal tools and barriers and the administrative tools and barriers is really how you ensure success.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And for the record, John Wheeler, manager of Washington County Emergency Management, and for level setting and for Greg's edification, the RDPO Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization is our regional forum that coordinates planning and preparedness for large-scale emergencies, including public health emergencies. Public health is very much integrated into that organization, along with our healthcare providers and others. And in terms of what specifically Greg is talking about in terms of an administrative and legal framework, that is really primarily those authorities primarily rest at the state and at the local level, county and city level. And so that's generally going to be where the administrative and legal framework is going to come from that governs emergency response and public health emergency response. The RDPO has and does play a role in interagency coordination in regard to these issues to make sure that we have, in terms of administrative and legal policies, we have opportunities for alignment and coordination of our efforts, both in terms of, again, administrative and legal preparedness and just emergency operations preparedness as well. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Treese, just to clarify?
Yes, thank you. But like I said, again, is this information going to be, should we be sharing it with RDPO as well? Or are you confident that RDPO is well set?
It's a good question. I mean, that certainly is an issue we could bring up before my colleagues at the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization to see if that would be a good forum to coordinate and share this kind of information.
Thank you.
Great.
If I may.
Sure.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Board of County Commissioners. For the record, my name is Marie Bowman Davis. I am the local public health administrator and public health division manager here in Washington County. And I would like to invite Adrian Donner, the public health emergency preparedness supervisor, up to help also address our regional coordination efforts, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks. For the record, Adrian Donner, supervisor for public health emergency preparedness today. I wanted to add to what John was saying around the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization. As John said, public health is very connected in. There is an entire work group that is public health emergency preparedness coordinators and planners from a 5-county region that comes together every month. We are directed, or we report back to a group called the Regional Public Health Leadership Group, which consists of the public health managers and the health officers from the Tri-County region primarily, although we pull in the other counties as needed also, so that we have both that kind of leadership level decision maker group as well as our planner and operations group, both tying into the regional preparedness group at the RDPO. So it's a really well tied in group of folks, and we are just one silo of excellence there. They're the silo for everyone, and we do a lot of cross work as well. And I will cede back to Marie.
So let me get ahead of my skis here and reel me back in. One of the things we talked about is, okay, what if there is a incident in our community and people could take it and spread it to other communities, because we know we have a transient community. People live and work in different places. So there's a legal component of that. Like, can we shut down public transportation? And then there's the,
No, we can't. We can only affect urban and unincorporated Washington County.
well, so
You've done a good job of convincing me of that.
yeah. So, well, we can do local public health authority. We've got some authority there as well. But there's a lot of coordination that has to go on too with TriMet and everybody else. So there's a lot of components on a simple question that are legal and administrative and coordination in nature. So that's a lot of the thinking that's going on behind the back of the curtain.
Which goes to, well, oh, no, I'll just butt in. It goes to the question of why do we care? Okay.
Yeah.
Emergencies will happen.
Mhm.
No elected official will ever be thanked for planning for an emergency. But what the five of us know from experience is that it is a very lonely position to be in, to not have a playbook of what to lean into or on. And that's why I think what you're touching on is really important work. But I think what was missing for me is that interest statement for any elected official.
Mhm.
I think we really need to work on that. And we need your help to work on that too.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, why should we care?
Mhm.
How is it that we see ourselves having a role? I appreciate the mention of silo of excellence. I appreciate the coordination. But I'll also add, we know we've got a really great public health team and a really good emergency preparedness team. And they work together along with our other departments here in the county, including our legal arm. We know we have a major program going on with public health modernization. I don't know if the CDC is requiring diddly-do of the state of Oregon. I know our public health modernization plan, if I'm right, I'm grasping here. I believe we have to meet requirements for OHA for that plan that you and your organization are working on, right?
It's for the state legislature. It's the state legislature was directed OHA and local health departments to put forward the modernization plans. So we're coordinating with OHA, but it is under a direction from our state legislature.
Okay. Nonetheless, we are directed by the state to make sure we meet certain requirements. Okay, got it. Does the CDC play a role with setting some of that direction that the state of Oregon is expecting us to deliver to?
Thank you for the question, Chair Harrington. I would say that we look to the CDC and experts like Greg to help inform the content of our proposed plans.
Okay.
We do not receive additional direction or explicit instruction from the CDC. This is a training center. They have tools and resources, and they can share learnings with us.
Of best known practices.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's why they're here, is helping us access the resources. And as was mentioned previously, this an exchange of knowledge that happens on an ongoing basis. And I'm really grateful for this longstanding relationship, and that we're able to incorporate the learnings into the work that we're doing locally and regionally.
I think the board that you have now is pretty good at leaning in for opportunities. None of us can control the future boards. And so part of what I will benefit from is as we lay the next foundation through these different plans, what sort of foundation can we leave behind for our future colleagues to know that we have the stellar set of resources here at the county, and to lean in to these opportunities to keep up that excellence is something that I'm grasping for. But anyway, I butted in. My apologies. I usually go last.
Chair, to that.
Okay, Miss Angie has something first, Commissioner Treese.
So as I mentioned, Mr. Wheeler will be coming back to your board in 2024. We haven't landed on what date on the rolling calendar yet. Chair, we can make sure that we are intentionally connecting this conversation. This is really an informative conversation into, if there's legal questions you have in this space, for you to be able to take this opportunity to lift them up now, to kind of share. And you mentioned the thread, and sometimes that thread can be woven best through a timeline that we present in future board discussions as we continue to look at our emergency management procedures, policies specifically around public health. So we'll lay that out. So it's really intentional, and so that your board, future boards can see that connection point in the conversations that we have.
Okay. Commissioner Treese, I didn't mean to cut off your point. Did you have something else?
Well, Tanya's comments help me because I'm having a little trouble figuring out where this has applicability. Personally, I thought when I look back at COVID, I remember just the interconnectedness of the staff and the way that everybody worked together, and the community outreach, the support through the emergency center. And I'd ask Brad if you felt as connected from the legal standpoint as I saw that the operational team be connected.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Okay.
we were in the thick of it. Yes.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought, and that's why I'm reflecting on some of the comments or the presentation, and wondering if there's anything that I missed in that connection point, and I didn't think so. So thank you.
Other commissioners, thoughts, questions?
I'll go next, Chair Harrington. Thank you for the presentation. I agree, this is certainly the start of a comprehensive discussion on policies and practices for addressing emergencies. As I think I shared with you, my interest is as well to ensure that our communities are well prepared and resilient in the face of unexpected events. I did review the material, this PowerPoint presentation, and I did have like 2 questions, and I think I labeled it. One was on slide 11, and the other question was on the last slide. On slide 11, how is the funding allocated for emergency preparedness and response? Was a question that came to me. And then along that, are there dedicated funds for this purpose? And if so, how's the budget managed to ensure readiness is what I was wondering when I was reviewing this material on that slide. And then in terms of the questions that came to me on the last slide was, and perhaps maybe this is like the after action assessment report that is coming to us, as Tanya explained, but I was wondering what measures are in place to continuously evaluate and update the emergency response plan and adapt it. Did I say adopt? Adapt it to the evolving threats and challenges. So those are some of the things I was wondering, and I'm glad John is in the room and Adrian. Those are the 2 questions that came, and then I had another question that was like around resource allocation and prioritizing, but I think we'll wait for John Wheeler's question, or yeah, you can say.
We should have just committed to being a panel. I will take these because you asked the funding question. The funding at the CDC is really complex, but we have funding that comes into each county as well from the CDC. So the primary funding source for the public health emergency preparedness program is CDC funding. It flows into every state and territory. And then it funds some of the work done at OHA here, and then each county gets a portion. It's not enough to cover what we do, but it's our primary federal funding source. And gives us it comes down with some to-dos around planning and being prepared. For the AAR process, every time we do an after action process, part of that is an improvement plan. So we go through and say what went well, what didn't go well, what do we want to improve? Sometimes things that didn't go well aren't our thing to improve. So we want to note it, but sometimes it is. And so our COVID AAR is no different. We have a list, I want to say it's 55 things, but don't quote me on that, in our improvement plan. And that improvement plan, each item gets connected to a lead person. That person isn't necessarily the one who's going to do the work, but that's the one who's going to go back and say, how's the work going on this item? Are we getting there? Does this item still make sense? There are definitely after action improvement plan items that stop making sense because of other changes in structures and systems. But some we want to make sure we have a new policy in place. We have an answer to that issue. So we assign a lead person, and then we try to set a date for when it will be done, and we continually update that. And those roll into an overall tracking form. So we have the COVID after action, we have an MPOX after action that public health responded internally, and with public health partners in the region. And so that had a few items. So those roll together. So we're constantly looking at how do we improve the system so that the next time we have a response, it's better.
And I think in the actual implementation, the use of those funds, I think to maximize their efficacy, it goes to the third aspect of, I think, the commission, the board kind of commissioner's role. I definitely understand the coordination and the continuity is something that you already see recognized by the staff's efforts to date. I think the kind of that first aspect, though, is really where the commissioners can come into play, and that's the prioritization. It's the recognition that you support the identification of aspects of the county ordinances that might inhibit the use of those funds. Are there ways in which funds are allocated and distributed in budgets, in different pots of money that might make perfect sense on a sunny day, but when it comes to actually utilizing those in an emergency for staff or purchasing resources, materials, and supplies, could they inhibit the response? And I think one of the goals of talking to the board today is to raise your level of awareness that as this AR process unfolds, there could be certain actions identified that only the board can take in order to achieve an improvement. Are there aspects of the way funds are going to be distributed and spent and approvals that provide great accountability on a regular day-to-day basis, but might create obstacles to an effective response? And I think staff will, recognize that value most and recognize the openness to solutions with the recognition that this is something that is worthy of prioritization of effort and energy among staff as they do this after action process.
If I may make a connection, so part of my understanding is John and Adrian will be coming to you multiple times to continue to give you updates. And like Ms. Angie said, about their progress. And with that, we internally as staff are going to be working on tabletops and exercises and trainings. And so part of Greg being here today, we are going to be meeting with Adrian and John and our HHS director, Mira Samantel, this afternoon to discuss what would benefit Washington County for the next training. What did we learn? What do we want to incorporate? What do we want to test? And so we are leveraging this opportunity as what can we do to celebrate our successes and continue to improve? And to your point, Chair Harrington, how do we help support future boards?
Any other commissioners?
Yeah, one comment to you, Greg. You mentioned a few times that you're an attorney. My background's, I'm a CPA. I've been doing it a long time. I make a lot of presentations to a lot of groups, and I feel a little bit this what I'm smiling about it. I feel like when I make my presentation, they're probably saying, "My goodness, this is a little more complicated than I really want to be involved with, and it's not something that I'm going to deal with on a daily basis because each of us come with different skill sets."
Yeah.
I'll lead up to what I want to say, and that is that you got a lot of people here with a lot of passion about a subject, and that's the subject you're interested in as well. But you know what's really interesting to me, just me, not the rest of the board, but to me, and that is not so much the details, not so much what's happening, because I don't have the expertise to do that. You want to talk about a host of business activities, I can do that with you all day. But what's the gold standard, and are we in somehow achieving that? So when I issue financial statements with an opinion on them, I'm saying you did what you were supposed to do. When the staff brings this, I'm pleased. I know it's important. It's good work. I'm glad that we do it. We need to have it done. But I have no idea whether it's just as good as the one down the road or the one over the next block. I really don't know. So as you go around the country, wouldn't it be nice if either, I don't want to call it an accreditation program or some kind of a look through, could you do that? Because to me, we can pat ourselves in the back all day long, and that's nice of us to do that. But it'd be nice for future boards, to the point, or even us, to say, I don't have to worry about that. You know, we've done the best. We've had somebody at a federal level said, that's what you need to do. And we can sleep at night satisfied that we're prepared. So what do we do to get to that point?
It's something that organizations like NACCHO, as well as ASTO, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, have been doing is putting together these best practices, toolkits, and menus, some of these effective methods and policies and strategies that jurisdictions have developed, make them available for folks in a wide variety of jurisdictions to utilize. I think one key aspect of that is the bestowing of innovation awards upon certain health departments for some of the innovative practices, like the one that you all receive. And the purpose of that is, yes, to recognize good work that was done for the benefit of those individuals who did that work. But I think most importantly, those awards highlight particular effective public health practices that others can emulate and model and utilize going forward. And so all of those aspects are what informs the individual assistance that I provide when I go out to jurisdictions, and the knowledge that I collect. And it's also what informs, the broader institutional recommendations. And going forward, CDC is including administrative preparedness as a preparedness capability, and providing guidance for the roles of the individuals who are writing plans and developing exercise, all the way up to the policymakers of the jurisdiction, to help them understand the different roles when it comes to identifying and potentially resolving barriers to an effective response. And so it's very much trying to make sure that we are recognizing a variety of effective practices, because jurisdictions are very varied, and finding many different forms of communicating that to individuals through everything from me coming to a jurisdiction and answering questions about particular scenarios and what I've seen other jurisdictions do in the past, to those bigger, broader kind of institutional recommendations and guidance for effective use of government resources for emergencies.
If I may, I know we probably need to wrap up.
Let me respond, and you can.
Well, my apologies.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you. You've described that you're developing toolkits and best practice.
Mhm.
That doesn't get to the point. Let me tell you what the point really is.
Mhm.
When somebody goes to their attorney, they say, am I reasonably protected?
Mm.
Do I have some comfort, some reasonable standard that's been applied? Wouldn't it be wonderful, again, at the level that you're at, if there was some oversight or some sort of internal audit you do or something that said, yes, you've indeed incorporated all the best practice without an outside look. This is my opinion, nobody else, this is mine. We can take all the information you give us all day long and say, well, that's the best practice. That's great. But nobody's saying we implemented. And what did we do for those who follow us and for the public if we really didn't have someone, in essence, certify or somebody look at it and say, you did a good job. So that's where I'm going. I'm just giving you feedback,
Yeah.
honestly.
I understand. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you bet.
This is where things like accreditation really help us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't really want to wait for years before somebody plays back to me the detail of what you described about what somebody thinks my role as an elected official is. I know how crappy it felt during COVID, but I don't know if I'm in alignment or even in the same universe as what CDC thinks my role is or isn't. So I don't know where to go with that thought, but Commissioner Willie, you haven't had a chance.
No,
to
I've
contribute.
just been listening to a lot of this stuff. The information that's on the screen there was intriguing to me, but I have to admit I don't know what an LHD is.
Local health department.
Oh, okay. So anyway, that was just interesting, the dynamics of shortfalls, I guess, that you've identified in there. But other than that, it's been an interesting conversation. It's kind of new stuff for me from the standpoint of just I've always thought, oh, Catherine's got this, so I don't need to.
I am blessed
Yeah.
with the board that I have served on through our pandemic, through the wildfire crisis we had, emergency in 2020. And these colleagues, I think, continue to do marvelous work in investing federal resources that we have. So I think, we have a track record of being willing to lean in and lap this stuff up and apply it for service to our community. So I look forward to learning a little bit more so it doesn't feel like it's so over my head.
Well, I guess I should have said we have great staff that do this, because this
Yeah.
is really, to me, very complex. And just knowing that y'all's working on that, I'm good enough for that.
Thank you. And I'll turn this over to Miss Angie. Just to kind of summarize, part of the reason why Greg is here is because this is a celebration of the leadership of Washington County. That the award that was mentioned was in response to your board's actions. And so we look forward to pulling that out of the archives and sharing that with you. It's really a celebration and building on that success.
Hey,
And
I really missed the message.
and so
Celebratory.
so
Maybe a big
why Washington County? Washington County is the local public health authority, right? No city within our boundaries has a public health department or role, and your leadership, when you add your local public health authority hat, that allows an opportunity to impact all jurisdictions across the county. And you have leveraged and leaned in, as you've said, to using your local public health authority governing body hat to pass policies to improve the health and well-being of our communities. You've done it more than once in the most recent times. And this is just building on the successes. So I just wanted to, I guess we buried the lead and I apologize.
No, that's okay. I also had never imagined, uh, we seek our legal advice with all of our preparedness plan, but I hadn't thought about the scope of legal preparedness as you have enumerated today. So you've opened my eyes and my viewpoint a little bit more, and I certainly am appreciative of your expertise at CDC, but you're also working collaboratively with our organization so that we can ensure we do a better and better job every day. So thank you. Enjoy Oregon while you're here.
Yes, I
Thank you.
will. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thank you. Just to let you know, first day we got COVID, I remember the date clear as day. I emailed Greg. It's like, should we declare a local public health emergency or a local emergency? You remember those very first days? So we work in conjunction with CDC. I also reached out to the state.
Mhm.
Remember that very first days? And so we're all working together on this.
Yep.
And that's a strictly legal issue, and it flows beyond that.
Mhm. Yep.
Thank you so much. I'm at CDC now, but my roots have always been in local public health, and I always want to do everything I can to just better serve, as well as raise up the great work that happens at the county level. And so, thank you all so much for having me, and thank you for the work that you've done to date. And I look forward to what you all do in the future.
Well, if you might consider please passing on to your colleagues at CDC how grateful we are for them, because boy, did we all lap up information, resources, and support from CDC, especially during that pandemic. So, and I don't think you've heard enough thanks along the way.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for sharing your time with us. Okay, we're going to move on to an entirely different aspect of our portfolio, from public health over to transportation policy, and specifically transportation funding policy. Woohoo! We're having some fun now, folks.
Do everything we can to make it as fun of a presentation as we can.
How you doing there, Commissioner Treese? Are we checking in with you enough?
Yes, thank you. I turned my camera off during the presentations because it feels like it is distracting. Is that
No
okay?
worries. Yes,
Okay.
it's okay, of course.
Okay, distracting for you, I meant. To have me.
Yeah, no worries.
Good afternoon, Chair and Board. I'm Erin Doyle, your Senior Government Relations Manager. Here with, introduce yourselves now or later.
You've got to introduce your voices at least, in case someone's only listening to the audio.
Good afternoon, Chair and Board. I'm Jessica Pells. I'm the LUT Policy Analyst.
Hi, good afternoon. Stephen Roberts, Land Use and Transportation Director.
The GR team has been working with LUT a lot on a lot of issues, and they're all kind of coming together in preparation for what we anticipate in 2025, which is why we're here with you today. So today we wanted to talk about, get a little bit more specific. You may recall that in the October 24th GR agenda setting conversation, we talked about policy frameworks, but wanted to provide a little bit more concrete example of what we were talking about in the transportation world, and then give you some background information as it relates to how state decision-making about their policies and revenue sources could impact us, and then identify what those opportunities are in 2025 if we create a policy, if your board agrees to a policy framework once we have some collaboration and conversation. So the ultimate policy question for your board is, should we as a staff start drafting a policy position framework for your consideration and adoption to address the ongoing transportation funding policy conversations? And if so, what further information do you need, and what other directions do you have to staff as you've considered what's important to you in the policy conversation? So just to provide that background, we did include two examples in the packet of from the region. Those were targeted to tolling because that's what they were talking about in those policy frameworks. We are not proposing a tolling framework. We are talking about the bigger picture and the broader scope of a 2025 revenue packet. But this is what a policy framework means to your GR team and to your staff. We know in the legislative agenda, we have guiding principles, we have priorities. This sits somewhere in between those things and is a longer document that really helps staff and your board identify what success looks like for the county in those policy conversations and highlights those key areas of concern that your board has and wants to see addressed when we adopt that framework. And the tool does help staff work through complex conversations in a timely manner and not having to do hour presentation after hour presentation during work sessions. But it can also help the commissioners in your meetings and on your committees when you're wanting or needing to speak on behalf of the county that you've already got buy-in from your fellow commissioners as you approach a conversation at JPAC or MPAC or Region 1 TAC. But this is not intended as to supplant the policy discussions that the board would have on specific things if needed, or if the topics go beyond what we have planned for in the framework. At the end of the day, the decisions on what the policy of the board is sets the policy for the county, and that's what staff will react to. The framework is intended to be a tool to say, this is the outcome that's desired by the board, and how we get there. We will work with, in those policy conversations and come back and tell you that the outcomes are being met, or work to say the policy outcomes that Washington County needs aren't here. We don't support this approach. So the second question, of course, is why a transportation funding framework? And I think as the chair highlighted this morning, there's been some notice of some operation and maintenance funding concerns that ODOT has put forward. But it's not just that. There's also a long conversation going on in this region in particular about how to bring in federal funds, talking about tolling, talking about the interstate bridge replacement. Those are big transformative projects that are going to take up a big chunk of revenue, and also are going to need to identify new revenue streams. And then, as I stated, the state revenue challenges they're not here, they're not at our doorstep, but they are projected in the near and middle term, what the state highway fund is going to look like over time. And that's where the operations and maintenance of the state's system comes into play. But also, I wrote cost sharing, and despite everyone checking my work, we meant revenue sharing. The revenue sharing can be impacted as the policy conversation moves forward. There are a number of ways where the state provides a portion down to us, and they also provide authorities for your board to take up those policy considerations at the local level. So to that end, wanted to talk, it's very challenging having one hand and turning pages. We wanted to talk through what those revenue shares look like, what this county has agreed to as its policies, and look at some past packages to just kind of set the background that will help in this conversation.
Considering what's your information on your revenue sharing, I think maybe we should be talking about cost sharing.
We all agree that everyone else should pay for our stuff. This slide is not intended to, dig deep into the details, but the chart that's here is intended to help visualize how much of the county's transportation funding sources could potentially be impacted in these policy conversations at the state level. And we're really focused on the 5 that are highlighted on the right-hand side, 2 of which are really directly raised at the state level and then formulaically pushed down to us. And then the other 3, the county gas tax, the county vehicle registration, and the transportation and development tax / system development charges are really options that the state legislature provided us that the board gets to decide the policy on at the local level. What is not included in this or any of the background information is that there is the potential for additional revenue streams to be part of this conversation. And so when we're talking about a framework, it's not just focused on these 5, it is revenue source neutral to them for the most part. But really these 5 funding streams really can highlight how that policy consideration can have impacts on the county, and then we can extend from there. If they talk about tolling, if they talk about road user fees, replacement of the gas tax, all of those things which might be on the table, we can be reacting to it with the knowledge base of how it has worked in the past when the state shares down to us or provides us with authority. So to talk in more detail, I'll make experts talk.
If you could go back to
Sure.
that slide, though, when we talked about the slide, previous presentation, what was made clear is the right-hand half is really focused on operations and maintenance, and the left-hand side on capital. And I really think for us to continue using this, we need to put those notes or words down at the bottom, because otherwise the general public will think, oh, well, it's all there. And no, it isn't all there.
Right. Yes. And we're updating this chart actually as we speak. So we're working that in. So thank you. So I'm going to just talk briefly about sort of our existing state shared revenues briefly. So as Aaron mentioned, there's counties and cities receive distributions from the state highway fund, which primarily comes from the state gas tax and state vehicle registration fees. There are some other ancillary vehicle related fees that go into that as well. And then the state weight mile tax for heavy vehicles, which they pay in lieu of gas taxes, if you will. So that's about 35% of our revenue. So it's a big share, and it really is essential to our system operations and maintenance here at Washington County. We think of ourselves as having, Melissa's going to kick me, a 3-leg stool, and road fund is one of the legs, and it really supports that kind of ongoing operations and maintenance. We have MSCIP, and then our system development charges and TDT really help us in terms of building out capacity and addressing existing safety and capacity deficiencies. Also, there's the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, STIF. Both the chair and Commissioner Rogers are quite familiar with this from their participation on some committees that help us as we're doing the work and our local and regional partners doing the work around identifying needs for transit service enhancements, some supplemental services within the TriMet district, like shuttle services that supplement TriMet service, but also beyond the TriMet district. And those sort of funds can be used both for capital needs, so for new buses and stop enhancements, but also just for operating the service itself. Oh, thank you. All right. And so there are some local revenues that are also, as Aaron alluded to, allowed by statute. Counties can adopt a gas tax, and we have done that back in the late 70s, actually. 1 cent per gallon fuel tax. The revenue from that is generated, or is rather split between the county, which retains 40%, and then we send 60% to the cities within the county, and that's distributed based on their relative proportional population. Your board also adopted a county vehicle registration fee. That's currently $30 per year and $17 for motorcycles and mopeds. And it is collected when vehicles are renewed or registered at the state. The county fee is added on to the state fees for that as well. The revenues from that are split 60% are retained by the county, and then 40% distributed to the cities based on population. I would note that on the gas tax, there is no prescribed maximum in statute, as I recall. So the 1 cent was a local decision that was made in the late 70s. On the county vehicle registration fee, the statutory limitation there really says can't exceed essentially the equivalent of the state registration fees. So since your board adopted the $30 fee, we could have gone as high as 43 at the time. We could now go as high as about $61 per year in keeping with increases in the state vehicle registration fee as well.
Is that just a board decision, or do we have to go back out to voters?
That would be a board only decision. And then lastly, we mentioned transportation development tax and system development charges. So again, those are just ways to help recoup costs for needed infrastructure improvements related to serving new growth areas that the county collects as well.
And each one of these, if as policy discussions happen at the state level, could have impacts if they change policies. For example, if those limits are further capped, or if authorities are, modified in ways, for example, and then additionally, if they stop charging a state gas tax, how do we then collect and ensure our gas tax is maintained? Things of those nature. So just bigger policy things that keep me up at night. So prior transportation packages are not uncommon. They kind of come on these an unset schedule, but traditionally looking at like 5 to 7 years between packages, and they are usually a combination both of revenue raising policy choices at the state level and some sort of package of projects that get worked on. This is just an example of some of those transportation packages at the state level. Jobs and Transportation Act, that's where you start seeing those gas taxes, registration and title fees going up. The Connect Oregon program is projects and distributions across the state that then pay for a variety of types of transportation projects. But then a massive conversation took place starting in 2015, and it ended up in the 2017 House Bill 2017, which makes it so easy to remember what year it passed, of a comprehensive transportation package. It increased the gas tax. It increased vehicle registration, title, and driver's license fees. It also opened the door to the conversation around tolling on the large scale, not just on a few bridges that we have within this region. And it also created the STIF fund with that employment tax specifically dedicated to transit. And that is in part because there is a constitutional restriction on anything that is raised for use of roads, stays on the roads, and transit has a complicated, sometimes it counts and sometimes it doesn't, because it's about the physical infrastructure versus the operations of transit services. So that's where the STIF becomes vital, as it can do both. In addition, that transportation package was a result of a statewide conversation. And one thing that was really lifted is what they called at the time the 3 bottlenecks within this region that have impacts not just on those of us who live, work, and recreate here in this region, but anyone trying to get goods, services, or themselves through the region. And so they set aside plans for funding for the Rose Quarter, the Abernathy Bridge replacement, and 217 being the only project that got directed funding. Both Abernathy and Rose Quarter were tied to some sort of tolling program potentially, but also the gas tax had a specific set aside for the ongoing work on those 2 major projects. That was opened up again in 2021, and we had conversations around what was going on, and we were trying to keep the board updated, and it made it very challenging through that session to make sure that we were staying on track with where the board wanted to go, because it was an unexpected conversation. And so it was a reallocation of some of that gas tax set aside to open up more to go to the I-205 project and also other projects within the region beyond the Rose Quarter. And that's, created some other pieces of the conversation we expect to come forward in 2025, where the progress report on those major bottleneck projects, besides 217, have been, a lot of questions have been asked. So from there, and why we need a policy framework, why we would like a policy framework set from the board, is really about making sure we are currently at the table and taking advantage of the opportunities that can come in a 2025 package. So this is when I never look into a crystal ball and try to project what anyone is going to do, I've done just that for you today. And what I expect to see in 2025 from the conversations that actually all of us have been having with our colleagues, with ODOT, with legislators, is that a big portion of the work is going to be looking at what the state says it needs and how it can get there. So I think it's been publicized pretty heavily that ODOT is out there talking about the problems in their long-term operations and maintenance funding, and that the package in House Bill 2017, every new cent was dedicated to something that wasn't operations and maintenance. And that budget, therefore, they feel is falling off over time. And they're kind of starting to do the outreach needed to the legislature, but also to its local government partners through the Association of Oregon Counties, League of Oregon Cities, and other places where they can tell their story. But the other ongoing conversation that the legislature has been having for quite some time is looking at the gas tax as a primary mechanism for revenue is not as, the chart doesn't look the same because we're seeing more and more efficient cars and we're seeing more and more electric cars. And those cars still have impact on the system, but they're paying less and less into the system. Tolling is also obviously coming into the conversation. It is not, it's not done yet. And probably will be continuing for the foreseeable future. And then there's also conversations around that weight mile taxation system and concerns from those that pay it, that they're paying a disproportionate share. So how the state then needs to look at that is what other revenue tools are out there. How do we make sure that everybody's paying their proportionate share? And how are we getting the end outcomes that we'd like to see? So that's really where we expect the 2025 legislative process to work. But what that opens up is both opportunities and potential risks or challenges to county resources. The biggest opportunity, of course, being the potential for project investments, like very specific called out in the same way that Rose Quarter 205 and 217 were. We have a number of pretty county-wide projects that we could talk about, that we have talked about, such as Southwest Corridor, TV Highway, Farmington, 99W. All of those sit in a space where there's a potential for opportunity for investment. But there's also some challenges that could come if shifting priority or bridging the revenue gap by the state touches on any of those 5 things that we talked about, or adds revenue streams which don't call for a share. So those potential revenue shifts can impact either, the state highway fund. Sometimes some people say maybe we shouldn't send 30% of the state highway fund to counties and 20 to the locals. So that 50-30 split that Stephen referenced is fearful in my mind. But also with new revenue streams, does that 50-30 split sit on top of them? So those are the kinds of questions and opportunities and challenges we have, that it would be helpful to have a policy framework to make sure that when we show that document to our legislative partners, to our delegation, to the community, it says we are paying attention and this is what we expect in order to serve the communities that we serve in Washington County with a comprehensive transportation system. So, in turning this over to Jessica now, the next 3 slides represent suggestions that staff has created for what could be included in the framework, but is not necessarily comprehensive. And that's where we will turn the conversation for you to direct us if the framework is the direction you would like us to go. So with that, I'll turn it to Jessica.
Thank you, Erin. Oops.
Sorry.
You already for me. Yeah, as Erin said, we wanted to draft these. We have been in these discussions with our regional partners. These are mirroring in a lot of cases what our regional partners have been drafting and adopting, and those examples are in your packet. And it also goes with your earlier guidance on tolling and other transportation policies to include broad public engagement throughout, to clearly identify impacts and benefits to Washington County communities and users, to strengthen a commitment to public transportation and especially public transportation funding, and to consider future transportation revenue sources. So we wanted to take all that and craft these policy concepts for your review. And what I'd like to do is, I know it's a lot of text here, but we'll read through them and then pause, and you can give us maybe feedback as we move through. So we've put these into 3 segments. First is desired outcomes, and then we'll go through funding and financing and then process. So under desired outcomes, create a safe, accessible, multimodal regional transportation system, enhance the safety of all users of all parts of the transportation system, improve transportation system resiliency to natural disasters such as earthquakes, flooding, landslides, and wildfires, improve regional air quality and reduce vehicle pollution, minimize local impacts, including diversion from a potential regional tolling program, and deliver clear benefits to travelers, communities, and businesses. And one we missed putting on here, but what should really be the first point, is to maintain our existing system. And so we could add that back in.
Actually, I think that in the very first one, we should remove the word create and replace it with the word advance. Because you can't advance it if you don't take care of it. And we already have a large transportation system. So it isn't about just creating it, but taking care of it, expanding it in the limited places where it needs to be expanded. So that's why as soon as you talked about change, that was the one change out of the list I was thinking of.
Okay, great. I'll just pause for another second if anyone else has any edits.
I bet if having gone down this route as a Metro counselor with prior iterations from 07 onward, but especially when I think about the council now, I think they're going to have a desired outcome that somewhere includes climate change or climate changes or climate adaptation. And from my standpoint, I don't find a need for us to include that here. Because we have to have our desired outcomes have to support the system we have now and into the future. And I think that your first bullet, your first, your second, your third, your fourth bullet, all get it though at that. So I'm really pretty rock solid on these desired outcomes from just as one of 5. Commissioner Treese, I'm trying to make sure I'm checking in out there in the interworld.
In the other hinterlands or whatever. You know, I don't have any argument with any of these. The only thing that I don't see on this, and maybe it's inappropriate to have it there, but something about a revenue program that's that's sound and predictable. And what I mean by revenue, for example, we went through all the different, the gas tax, all the different pieces, but we don't have enough. You know, we've talked about vehicle miles traveled. We've talked about a lot of different things. You know, and I'm just wondering if that's one of our desired outcomes.
I think you're really hitting on something. What's missing is we are looking for a finance system, and this is actually, I think this is a segue towards, there are 2 more slides on concepts, and the next one is on funding and financing. So these are just the general outcomes without drilling down to funding and financing as well as process. So why don't we keep?
Okay, but I do want to come back to this and make sure that we cover that concept. Okay, thank you.
Sounds great.
Shouldn't we be talking about in this particular one though? Shouldn't we be talking about mobility? I don't know what you call it, but it seems like, I don't know, does this encompass all the different aspects of transportation enhancements that we should be? I mean, we talk about the conflict between new pavement and increasing, I guess, reducing congestion. And, you know, to me, that's just, those are almost fighting words in different environments, just like you're next to the last dot there where you say including diversion. I mean, diversion is a huge issue in the tolling part of it. So, are we trying to stay high level? Let's try and accomplish something here. Are we kind of digging up everything that would be controversial?
Well, I think we wanted to make it broad enough that it would really guide us in the 2024 and 25 legislative sessions, but also in the realm of all the transportation policy discussions we're having, inclusive of tolling, but not geared directly to tolling, if that makes sense.
And it is, these are samples of concepts, but if there is consensus amongst the commissioners that there is something to drill into and be more explicit about, that is, I think, part of the conversation in answering the policy questions. What are those directions? Is there something that is missing here that we didn't include? And if it is drilling down into the concepts around pavement, new pavement, expanded capacity and congestion, I think we've always held those in the tolling conversation in particular as two pieces that can be achieved. With looking at what 205 was supposed to be in the 2017 package, but also the concept of you create better outcomes to travelers, communities, and businesses if there is a congestion reduction, but how you get to congestion reduction can have many policy choices. And if there are policy choices and directions from the board, that should be included in this framework.
So regional transportation systems have to deal with certain factors and conditions. So congestion, mobility is all encompassed in a regional transportation plan. I think one of the things that your comment got me to think about was that second to the last bullet, where I think the wording needs to be flipped. I'm getting there. With a potential regional tolling program, with the implementation of a regional tolling program, minimize risks, including diversion. I think that's the outcome we want. That's what you're trying to get at, but minimizing local impacts of what? Minimizing diversion with what? You're wanting the reader of these desired outcomes to hang in there until you talk about potential regional tolling. So I think it's clear if you lead with it, that that's where minimizing local impacts, including diversion, comes into play.
Yeah, I think the other piece that's missing is it's minimizing impacts to locally controlled infrastructure so that the state's not rolling its problems onto our systems, and we can be clearer in that by leading with.
Yep.
So I think that's what
Yes.
this conversation
With
is
state
supposed
programs,
to
including a potential regional tolling program. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I maybe back to Commissioner Willie's original question, is there an interest in having, I mean, I think to your point, Commissioner, the desire would be, as we're thinking about what is a safe, accessible, multimodal regional system, there is always a balance of sort of managing congestion and providing capacity, but also sort of being mindful of all the other trade-offs that we have to evaluate in making those kinds of determinations. So it could be either a reference to mobility and or a note about the desire to balance the varying needs, or not quite sure how to say it right now, but
I think that the other piece of what I heard from you, Commissioner Willie, is about it's not just the actual road itself, but also the other modalities that we've talked about, like transit has a congestion reduction outcome. And we're not focused on just one piece of the system. We are focused on all pieces of the system, and perhaps that can be made clearer in that bullet point or in an additional statement. Is that reflective of what you were talking about?
Yeah, a little bit. If I could sneeze right in the middle of this. I feel like a little bit like this is trying to write a mission statement. And there's a whole bunch of pieces to a mission statement. And so we start throwing all these words into it. And yeah, and to me, it doesn't create a clear, succinct message. And with all of these bullet points, I mean, it's a lot of stuff, but I mean, when you improve regional air quality and reduce vehicle pollution, okay, well, what does that mean? What means one thing to this segment and another to this segment? And it's the same thing with air quality. I mean, with I already said that already with some of the other bullet points. And to me, it was yeah, I don't even know what it would say, but I'd like to think it will take 2, 4, 6 bullet points to define it. But I could be convinced otherwise.
Well, so here's where, having dealt with a few other generations of this, though not as many as Commissioner Rogers, we led with mobility, we led with congestion reduction previously, and we've seen where it's gotten us. We got some, but we're still hampered by a lot of these elements here. And I just think we've got to focus on brass tacks. There are some desired outcomes here that are, in my opinion, listed not so much because they're key items that we're looking to change, but have to recognize that we function in an ecosystem where the state is held accountable, and the legislature has expressed prior opinions about our air quality and pollution reduction. And so that's why I think that particular bullet saves us. Frankly, I think if we lead with mobility or congestion, it's a bit passe, to be a little blunt about it. We just have a system that's failing right now, period. And so I don't really think it serves us to be zeroing in on congestion or mobility when the system is just failing.
Well,
I mean, just like OTIA, I remember at least one generation of OTIA, maybe it was 2, where the bridges in the state were crumbling. And under OTIA, there was massive work done to replace bridges. The effort
At a state level. But not
yeah, at the
local.
state level.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So,
Can I ask a question? Because I was gonna wait. There's a ton of questions I have in here and we could go all day. We're all getting tired. This is too heavy a topic at the end of the day. But is this only meant for the state legislative folks?
The purpose of a framework and how GR and other staff use it is at all tables where this is what's under consideration. So if there is a conversation about how we analyze a proposal at JPAC, it could fit under this framework if it's dealing with revenue.
No, let's be clear. The answer is yes, because anything that is discussed as a metro table is going to be focused on the state. There isn't going to be anything in a while at the federal level. So there can be multiple tables that are really focused on what kind of movement can we make as a state. And yes, you're right, it is getting late, but this is where I know for managing myself, it helps to see all 3 of these framework concept slides all together. And we really need to move on to them.
All right, let's move on.
No, can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
I was reflecting on like, what does a well-rounded transportation funding framework?
Louder, please.
What does a well-rounded transportation funding policy framework should look like? And for me, what I came up was like a well-rounded transportation funding policy framework should strike a balance between raising sufficient revenue for infrastructure development and maintenance while promoting sustainability, equity, and efficient use of resources. And then the other side of the coin was while also focusing on addressing the unique needs and challenges of Washington County. So that was like what should a framework reflect on. When I look the aggregate of both slides, and I apologize, I have to leave this conversation right now there's scheduling evolving going on. I gotta go pick up my kiddo from school.
I will say, like I said, on the 24th, I will check in individually with commissioners as we do further iterations of this. This is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. So I appreciate that comprehensive conversation. We'll talk further and then have another work session where the board looks at what we've drafted, if that's the direction we're headed.
And I was going to say, I really appreciate your wording there, Commissioner Fye, and
Yeah.
we'll follow up and get that written down.
Okay, we keep on going.
Okay, yes, let's move to the funding and financing.
The rest of us are brain dead, but we're going.
You will power through. There's not much left. The financing concepts include explore alternative funding mechanisms to address growing transportation funding needs, apply existing revenue sharing models to new funding mechanisms, fund public transit infrastructure and access through diverse funding sources that can expand services, and preserve authorized local revenue tools and allow for local options to access new funding mechanisms.
And Commissioner Treese, this is where I think your point about predictability is missing, and we can definitely work that in. Are there other concepts here that you would like to see besides that predictability?
No, I think that that's what I was trying to say is that we need the predictability and the to be able to forecast, to be able to look forward and do the work we need to do. Thank you.
And Commissioner, I wonder, I think if I was understanding you right, I think you're really addressing sort of the desire for predictability, but also sustainability.
Yes.
And ensuring that there's some long-term runway for these different funding sources.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll dive in. The problem I have is on the first bullet. Replace the word explore with implement. I am sick and tired of the state exploring. It's been exploring vehicle mile travel implementation for over 15 years.
I was having this conversation with our federal delegates 10, 15 years ago as well.
Longer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I did hear Commissioner Fye's paragraph, and that just isn't going to work with how these tables go. It's got everything in the kitchen sink in it. We've got to be pretty precise, which is what I think you've gotten to here.
I actually think it's too many. When we go to fund public transit infrastructure, we've got a funding for our public transit. We're not necessarily enamored with the way that TriMet spends that money, especially in Washington County. But and you want through diverse funding sources that can expand services. I mean, we want to fund transportation and the various different kinds of transportation, public transit and roads, if we wanted to just narrow it down to those two. But yeah, I think the missing piece right now is that ODOT readily admits that they're going to be broke in a few years, and doesn't seem to be any enthusiasm to identify what they have to do to not go broke at the legislative level. So to me, that would be our top priority of what we should be doing. We can't have a transportation agency that it only can sustain our interstate highways. I mean, that just doesn't work. So to me, that would be our top priority, figured out state. And then if you want to know something, that, you know, just an example of how ridiculous it is, look at the 2017 transportation bill and what they put. How much did they increase gas tax? Like a nickel? And they spread it out over 5 years?
Mhm.
Our gas fluctuates 50 cents every other week. And yet they wouldn't put 5 cents in there in a reasonably short fashion, and 5 cents didn't fix the problem. And so,
Also waited 2 years to implement.
Bold,
yeah, and so there, to me, there's, I mean, we are barking at the moon here when we expect our legislators to step up and actually do something that will address what the problem is and implement it within a reasonably short fashion.
Yeah, that's why I chose the word implement. Can we go back to the public transportation item?
Mhm.
What are you trying to get at? Because there's the payroll tax from employers and employees. The employee part is new. And what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah, I think it's just the recognition that there is such a hunger and an interest in better transit service. And so I think one of the things that we were suggesting that your board might support would just be this idea of just continuing to expand the available funding for transit in particular to help continue expanding those services.
Well, we already have a fact that in order for our 3-county region to satisfy state requirements with regard to regional air quality and pollution, meaning the smart climate choices, we are reliant upon expanded public transit infrastructure and access. And it's noted that there is a reliance on federal and state funding to make that happen. So let's be clear about what we really need. We need the state to step up.
We don't need to step up.
Well, we know that they're a local match. We tried to work on the local match to lead, and that went down in flames.
Could form a transit district, for instance, and grab into that 217 money. We could.
Yeah, but that would have with it.
I don't think you need to
boatload
say a
of
word
problems,
facial
so,
said it all.
yeah.
I think the other piece of this is being mindful, like when we're talking about, for example, tolling revenues and how they're used to address congestion management, that we have to find some flexibility from the state to put money into the transit system from those dollars as well and invest in major projects that could have transformative opportunities that we have spent a lot of resources on in this county to try and put forward and get ready, known as a Southwest Corridor. But also if there are other resources, that's the other hand that we're thinking about. It's not just, let's find a new tax, but also when we are looking at the revenue sources that are on the table, how can we put some of those into, some capital projects or TV highway is another place where there's.
Okay, so what you're really getting at is your very first bullet needs to also include transit, not just roadways, highways and roadways.
Okay.
And so that folds down right there. So we've talked a little bit about how there is a state physical system and there's a track record to invest in rehabbing or expanding that physical system, but not having the operations and maintenance. And we also know that there are orphan highways and some other major project needs that relate to ODOT. You mentioned a laundry list of TV highway, Farmington 99W, and orphan highways wise. I was thinking about the full extent of Hall Boulevard, not just a segment. So I'm trying to identify how in either the desired outcomes or in the funding and financing, we're addressing the application of potential revenues, both towards the expansion or construction, the jurisdictional transfer, I guess, these major local systems and the operation and maintenance. And so between the desired outcomes and the funding and financing, I'm having a little trouble blending or seeing how that's achieved.
Yeah, I think that
Is it clear for you?
I do understand. Actually, this reminds me of the day after we turned in the materials, I realized that the words jurisdictional transfer and orphan highways didn't show up. And so I agree that we need to work on that as we don't necessarily, when we draft the framework, have to divide it into 3 buckets, but something needs to be said about what is happening with the state's infrastructure that's become our major local transportation infrastructure.
You'll get it down on one
and we'll
page.
put it down. Yeah. So yes,
The other
will-
thing,
this
the
will be
other
much
thing
shorter.
I'm trying to figure out between these 3 is, so right now there's 50, 30, 20, okay, for the revenue sharing. Yes. If the state legislature, right, I'm thinking about scenarios, hypotheticals. If the state is going to the legislature, going to change that allocation because they feel they must, right? Then the only way that will work is if at the same time they enable all of the local jurisdictions to update all of its tools. Right. Going back to your graph. So
By that you mean give us more flexibility?
yes.
Okay.
They have to enable us to increase our local gas taxes like nobody's business, our vehicle registration fees, all those existing fees that we have.
I want to jump in because that's why I asked early on, well, who's this for? If it's for the legislature, that's one thing. It's for the local. I like a comprehensive. That's just Roy's mind. At this time of the day, I don't want to go on too long. But if I were in the state legislature or if I was at the OTC, I'd say you already have the ability to increase your gas tax. To do it. You have the ability to increase your vehicle registration fee. Just do it. If you want to talk about orphan highways, wonderful. We got a ton of them. We want to give you. Just take them. It's your problem and not ours. And so
we have to stop expecting them to build it out to a complete level.
I have some expectations at the local level as well. Take a look at the gas tax, how we split our 1 penny. We split it between us and the cities. Every time the cities have a 1 or 2 cent increase, which they do, how much of that do they give to us?
0.
0. And so we need some comprehensive back and forth of an understanding of what that means. To me, we need some basic principles. And the principles to me would be, you don't change the 50, 30, 20 without consultation with us. If we want to get more money for transit, and why I say a district, and everybody looks at me crazy, is because we're not replacing TriMet. There's another pool of money, has nothing to do with TriMet, that everybody else is sharing in, that they're all going in and getting money, but we're not, because we're not a part of that pool. And that would be more for our unincorporated and rural areas. But that would be another issue. As far as the vehicle registration and gas tax, I agree with the point that we got to stop saying explore, just do the doggone thing. Be bold. I mean, make some bold statements. On the local level, we got to start saying things like, we're not fixing state highways anymore. We put a lot of MSTIP money because we had it. And we said, well, we want to fix it for our residents. And say, we're not fixing your roads anymore. We've got to be have the courage to talk about, are we going to take these orphan highways and what does that mean? And what are they going to do? If you talk with ODOT, they'd say, gee, like on the Hall Boulevard, they keep telling me, we'll give it to you tomorrow. Do you want it? We're not giving you any money, but we'll give you the highway. We don't want it anyway. So, I mean, we've got to be careful exactly how we measure, but I think be assertive. I mean, that's what I would be, to say, this is what's tolerable and what's not tolerable. What's not tolerable to me is to cut the allocation without having some conversation. What's not tolerable to me is to sit there and say, we have all these orphan highways and we're not going to fix them. We expect the counties and the cities to do it. The multimodal approach is great for our area, and it's one of my main objectives, but you get into Eastern Oregon and Southern Oregon, that they could care less about that. And so, I mean, if we're talking to the legislature, we need to coach how we say that. When I talk with colleagues in other parts of the state, I mean, that's not there. We're talking about tolling. We don't even talk about congestion pricing. Congestion pricing completely different than tolling. And if that's going to be implemented at a state level and allow it, how's that going to be used? I mean, ODOT had told me that they would love to have congestion pricing be applied to, to 205 and the interstate bridges. But that's not the plan. The plan would not give them any congestion pricing. So there's a lot of things that are unsettled. So I've said enough, but it's difficult. And who is our audience? And I think our city partners need to be part of our Bible. We all agree what the standards is. That's what I think. So I'll stop and
I don't feel like it's our responsibility to write framework concepts that represent ODOT to somebody else. If ODOT or OTC wants to go do congestion pricing, let them go do that. So this tool doesn't need to be everything for everybody. Rather, this is supposed to be a tool that we put together so that our staff can go and represent Washington County needs, particularly at these state tables, so that as proposals for funding through the 2025 legislature get evaluated and used. So I don't feel like, based upon listening to your comments, that some of those things need to be advanced or included here. And I'm perfectly fine with letting Metro carry the water on congestion pricing right now. And our team will come back to us and fill us in on that, and we'll adjust things appropriately. We're just trying to get a base tool together here. So
we can all have different ideas. That's
yeah. I'm troubled a little bit by this policy framework concept and what we're really trying to accomplish here. Prioritizing robust, equitable, and inclusive community engagement. Good grief, for having a package in 2025, it's just not going to happen. If we're expecting project work to be enabled by the funding, then I would expect those projects to include those kinds of characteristics, but not for the concepts for the state legislature to be advancing funding. So I can see where they may have project descriptions or rules that get to that, which is where I think those things come in. The last bullet I'm fine with. Include local jurisdictions and local voices. Well, okay, let's make sure counties are talked about too.
Okay.
And the reason that I was imagining, okay, you're going to have these framework concepts, but I think it would also be helpful to have short multi-pager. I don't care if it's a 2-pager or a 4-page brochure that has this, since every county is different, right? We know here in Washington County, we have a county road system within the urban area, and we have a county road system in the rural portions of our community that are different than the county road systems in Multnomah County, right? Very few. Clackamas County does have a county road system, though ours is just of a different magnitude.
Yep.
And then we also need to work with our city colleagues to represent the enormity of the neighborhood street networks that they have or that exist here throughout the whole collection of 13 or so cities in Washington County. Whether that's a small table that you do by city with a cumulative whole at the bottom, including a row for urban unincorporated Washington County. And the reason why I think a one-pager like this really would be useful, especially for the Washington County delegation, is because of the way that the big city in our state has as many state reps and senators as we have for all of Washington County, right? And things tend to get oversized relative to the city of Portland, including for any gains that Metro advocates for at the state legislature. So we really have to lead with a set of concepts that accomplish what the county needs from a state system and a state funding program, but also ensure that we have that education tool for what is the system here in the entirety of Washington County. And I think that's one way where we also are able to give voice to our local cities as well. My last one on process is this: including a transparent and inclusive cost and benefits analysis to understand trade-offs.
This is one of those places where the conversations around tolling have been particularly informative of these words, but the hardest part we have as a staff in how we get information out of the state is like, what did they look at? What information are they using to balance policies? So having that transparency within the process helps us know what expectations are of us. And when they allocate whatever funding source it is to a project, what of their cost benefits have they looked at and how are they communicating with us?
So I have no problem with this being refined to say processes for projects. Okay. What ultimately I'm really hoping for is that the 2025 legislature will exercise leadership and advance a revenue story that stops just exploring alternative funding and actually implements. So and exercises the leadership, and because we need it. And if they don't do it in 25, then in 27 or 29, because the system's cratering.
Yeah, I think part of one of the reasons why this framework coming from the board is incredibly important is it tells our legislators that's our expectation starting now, that they prepare and get their ducks ordered or at least identified so that we can have this conversation before the 2025 session. And we have some members of our delegation who are already jazzed for this conversation, but more need more. And I think hearing from you through this document, this is what we care about, start talking about it, get your people, get the county what they need so that we can serve people.
So that brings me to the point that under desired outcomes, I think both Commissioners Rogers and Willie spoke to this a little bit, and I'm not sure that we've connected it up in our framework concept on desired outcomes. But our interest is not only with the counties and the cities within, but our connections with the state system. And I was thinking of regional transportation system includes state connectivity, but I don't think that that's partly because I spent 12 years as a Metro counselor. And so that's a mistake on my part. I think we do need to recognize that we don't function as an island. We are reliant upon that state system and the state connectivity. So somehow weave that in to the desired outcomes. Commissioner Treese, how you doing?
I'm here.
Did I miss any raised hands or were you able to plug in?
Nope, I'm doing fine. I'm still just absorbing some of this, but I first of all, I guess one thing I do want to say is I appreciate that the GR group has worked on this whole framework and we have the opportunity to weigh in here. I don't want to miss that point. I think it's really a great straw man, if you will, that we are working with. So thank you.
I would say it's the LUT team
Sorry.
and then a little bit of GR.
So
Sorry, Stephen.
So as you switch to this, yes, I think you're hearing from the commissioners that we would like to see the development of that tool. I wrote down a few closing statements or closing thoughts for myself that I'll share now. I've watched the video from the October 24th work session, and I thought you had some good conversation, but one point concerned me, and that was the idea that there were guiding principles was sort of lost through some of the conversation. And I think our staff tried to remind us that this upcoming session, when you were talking about the agenda for this upcoming session, particularly when I heard of a new project example, I was like, wait a minute, no, this isn't the time for new policies for this session. To say you're interested in something to frame up in 2024 leading to 25 is one thing. Mm-hmm. So we've got to think about our own discipline as a board on this. The other another point I wanted to make, and I didn't weave it into any of those concepts, revenue neutral is not sufficient. If the state legislature in 2025 just ends up with a formula where it's the same amount of money, we're going backwards. So I was going to say revenue neutral is wrong, but
where do you see revenue neutral?
It doesn't.
I think that the chair is suggesting another principle that should be out there is that this package in 2025 should not be revenue neutral. It should in fact enhance the revenue.
I completely agree.
We need to expand the revenue.
Yeah.
Right? We need to advance the system by
revenue neutral is just taking it out of my pocket and putting it in yours.
Yeah, this is not going to be enough. And the other thing is I have a lot of respect for the Trucking Association and the fact that products and services move with big rigs all the way to delivery vans. But this claim that any change to, for example, weight mile is the sky's going to fall, it just is a non-starter for me. It's because nothing is free. And their use does have impact on the system as well. So they're going to be pulling massively in the don't change anything. because we want to pay less, not more. But their trucks have to get around too, and their service vehicles. So they have to be at the table. Don't get me wrong. But I see there are just some false choices that get teed up in that domain. So next steps.
Yeah, I didn't include a next step slide, which is very unlike me. I think next steps are to continue the conversation with a few one-on-ones, making sure that we've heard things correctly, have those comprehensive conversations, and staff will work on drafting an actual framework so you can see what it looks like with all of this conversation wrapped into it, and then come back at a work session in the future, seeing if we can fit it into the agenda setting one, but that might get really long, really fast, and nobody wants that. It's going to be a complicated day. But we will find a time. We have January to get through this, but the sooner we can, this is a good start in the conversation, so I don't go too far afield when lobbyists or legislators ask me questions. I can say, I have a board meeting you should listen to. I'm going back here. But we'll check back in once we have something drafted and continue the conversation to see if there's a moment where we can actually adopt it, so that we can present it to our legislature and guide staff in these conversations.
Great. I would like to take a moment to highlight that we, the board, have a logistical problem. So I appreciate the fact, Commissioner Rogers, that you've noted here we are the middle of the afternoon. But group, we have a problem. We made a choice to change our meeting times from 8:30 to 9 to accommodate Commissioner Fai's need to drop kids off of school. I believe her drop-off schedule has changed, so we have not reverted back. Because of that change from 8:30 to 9, it means that we don't ever schedule a topic before the 10 o'clock. It may also mean that looking at next year, we need to think about either splitting our business meetings out to another day or having them in the afternoon and keeping our work sessions in the fresh part of the day. I'm also quite disheartened that our transportation representative has chosen to leave early today and has missed out on the culmination of this conversation. So that is a problem too. This isn't a problem that is just mine to solve. It has been coming up more and more over these last few months. So we need to spend some time in perhaps our December roundtable to figure out what we're going to do. Either we're going to be conscious and at somewhere between 2:30 and 3 o'clock take a break so that we can get to the work that we need to do, or make some other adjustments. Frankly, I don't know how to tee that up with alternatives. I'm just going to leave it as an agenda item that we have to talk about. But here we sit, 4 of 5, prepared to have work session at least until 4. And we have what we have.
I think it's a valid point that you make that under this structure, we can't get to any of these presentations before the board meeting because it's too short a window. And I don't know, I guess I've never really thought about moving board meeting times, but I don't know what precludes us from having that conversation.
Well, we've tried to not impact Commissioner Rogers' appeal to have all of our meetings all in one day, but it means we need the whole day, right? And I think we really need to figure out how are we going to get this this vast array of work done that needs to be done.
I would concur that we need to chat about that. I mean, it's hard to take heavy duty. I don't care if we were sitting here till 5 heavy duty topics a day. So, but I agree to that. two quick points, and that is it. And this is not meant to be insulting to anybody, but I have found that people understand things better if you write them at about a seventh or eighth grade level. I saw many legislative folks who kind of retracted from the 2017 discussion, saying I didn't understand that. That wasn't really what I understood. So we do that. Secondly, this is me talking. If I had my druthers, we would have some very firm, definitive things we want to accomplish. The wording is nice, but it gets lost in the jargon. I mean, if we want to say, you do not cut our 30% out, you will raise gas, whatever we say. I mean, I'm not saying what we say. And have some educational pictorial piece that's really easy to understand. Because frankly, when we talk about state highways, everybody says, well, that's 217, that's highway. No, it isn't. That's Farmington and Hall and yeah, there's a ton of them. And I don't think a lot of folks understand how much state highway we have. And every time I get around, probably yours conversation is different than yours, but they're saying, why don't you take the $12 highway? And I said, what do we get for it? You're gonna give us some money? And why don't you take Farmington? I said, what are you gonna give us, some money? Well, no, you just take it. And I said, those are $100 million.
We have enough liabilities, thank you.
Yeah, but they're saying the same thing for us. But I think that if we could understand just, I don't want to make it cartoony, but if people understood what the system is, they could visualize. And that's whether you're disinterested in, you're saying, I don't like politics, I'm at home, but now I understand, or whether you're a state legislator, I think it's important. And again, nobody else going to agree with me, but I'd like, if we ever got a comprehensive document, here's a piece with our cities, here's a piece with Metro, here's a piece with the state, because we all ought to be on the same. One of the disheartening things, I'll tell you is, because you and I used to go back, was when I was chairing the WCCC, we always said no individual meetings. Everybody went back the same song. I can tell you that, I went this last year. Everybody had individual meetings, their pet projects. There was no congruity. That's not the way you play it. I mean, that's just my opinion. Everybody might disagree, and I understand you're going to emphasize with your. But if you go in and say, well, that's what they said, but here's my project, we need to get some understanding. I'm just disappointed. That's just. So I'll be quiet, but I've said what I have to say.
I do take your point though, Commissioner Rogers, that the materials, the final product has to be something that I can hand to anyone, whether or not they're an expert in transportation or not. And they will say, I understand what Washington County needs for this to be a successful package. And I take that to heart. And I know that the LUT's communications folks are going to be useful, and I will make sure that
we don't have big city mayors go to their legislative folks and say, I don't agree with that at all. That's the county.
There are times when we cannot help but to disagree with our partners, but we will make sure that we're communicating clearly with them in these conversations.
You're not the issue. We need to have a better understanding. And I know the chair meets on a regular basis, but it's.
But you raise a good point. I do need to see a project list.
Okay.
That is separate from the frameworks, right? Because at the end of the day, there will be conversations about projects, and it's just a draft. It's not a be all end all. Doesn't have to be prioritized. But I know that we have needs for a working system across the entire county. Right. And so I feel geographically really good about the spread.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
great.
I'll make Steven do that.
Commissioner Treese, did you have something?
Yes, I just wanted to comment on Roy's comment. I think that I'm comfortable that LUT and GR will come forward with a succinct piece. My thought today was this work that we're doing is to make sure we're all together in the same direction.
Yes.
So I'm really comfortable with the work that's been done here today, and I expect that there'll be refinement as this material turns to an external source or becomes an external source.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, thank you all very much.
Yep.
This is a lot of work in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I appreciate the
Thanks for
detail. Is there anything
hanging in
further?
there.
Yeah, could you get the gas tax up by next week?
I will be in Eugene. I'll work with our county colleagues.
EV fee.
Leadership, did you have anything you
I
needed to?
I do want to just circle back on your conversation on meeting options and that discussion on your roundtable. Staff can help support that by, we heard your conversation and coming up with some options that can just spur discussion for that roundtable. I do also want to share, thank you, Brad, for moving away just in the last couple minutes. I received just a text from my husband that my son came home positive with COVID, so I'll be leaving. So I apologize for being aloof, but stay away from me just in case.
Nice job. Way to stay in. Yeah.
He's got a
Yep.
trip coming up. Yeah.
I like you, but not that much. Well, so
Not
do
that
I, as a matter of
everybody.
fact. Just don't you get close to me.
Catherine,
I'm sure.
Yes,
Catherine,
Commissioner Treese.
what, I just have one other comment about the meeting times.
Yep.
I'm comfortable in whatever direction we go. If we go back to starting at 8:30 versus 9, and I think all of us would understand the ground rules more if we knew, okay, we're going to stop at X time in the afternoon.
Well, right now that is a target of 4 o'clock.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
But we
I'm
can
saying
see
if
how
we-
well it's working.
Yep. And I agree 100%. I just wanted to let you know from my perspective, I'm more flexible. So I appreciate it, but I do think we need the time to get through the work that we have to get through.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, yeah, we're adjourned.